Can the Louisville Cardinals win out the rest of the regular season? Well, we'll answer on today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into this Friday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. This is my fifth year covering the University of Louisville, third year hosting this show, and I want to take the time to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the show is free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. Today's episode of the show brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. This is going to be a little bit of an interesting episode. All we really had to discuss was previewing the Georgia Tech matchup, which we're going to do in the final segment. I sort of left it up to the fans. I went to a group chat and said, what would you all want me to discuss for the first two segments of the show? And it seemed like the overwhelming majority were centered around two questions that are dominating conversation both amongst the fan base and even starting to trickle into other fan bases and discussions. Number one, can the Louisville Cardinals win out the rest of the regular season? And number two, can Pat Kelsey's program become a powerhouse in high school recruiting? So some good questions that have been discussed over the past week to couple weeks, and we're going to attempt to answer those on the show today. With Louisville currently on a 10-game winning streak, they won all of the 8 games in January. The question now, looking ahead to the month of February, with 5 road games, 2 home games, and then 3 home games in March, you sort of have to ask yourself, can Louisville really do this? Like, I know that we sort of joke around a little bit sometimes, but no, like, seriously, can Louisville really win out here? The short answer is yes, but I don't think that anyone would argue with the point that looking that far ahead can be a little dangerous. I'm not suggesting that the team is. If anything, I'm suggesting the contrary because they focus on just one game, and that game seems like the most important thing. And of course, that's what sports is all about, or what it should be. And Pat Kelsey said this in a press conference in the summer, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he went along the lines of stating that every practice, every workout, every rep, every game from here on out is the most important in the history of Louisville basketball. And all that's basically saying is that, we're focused on the right here, right now. And we're taking this truly one day, one rep, one play, one game, one practice, one workout at a time. And that's awesome to see because Louisville hasn't really overlooked any opponents amongst this winning streak outside of Eastern Kentucky and maybe UTEP before then. But for the most part, Louisville has stayed present and not looked too far ahead. And I know that that's technically what you're supposed to do in sports, but a lot of times it doesn't happen. So no one's going to argue that looking ahead that far is dangerous. And even from like a probability standpoint, it's possible, but even though Louisville is favored to win basically every single game from here on out over the next 10 games, still the chances of ripping off a 20-game winning streak to end the season, it's not likely. Not to say that it can't happen, but if you're to tell me before the season Louisville's going to go 6-5 in non-conference play and they're not going to lose a single game after that, and it's like, excuse me? So I think that we have to be honest in knowing that Louisville winning the next 10 games on the schedule, it's unlikely just from a common sense and logistical point of view. However, when you factor in context and you look at how tough January was, look, you can argue all you want about, is the ACC all that good or is it not? Is it overrated or is it not? If you're one of those people in the comments all the time saying, well, this is a cupcake league, ACC is not that good, okay, whatever. That's your opinion. I respect your opinion. I disagree, but it's whatever. What you really can't argue is that regardless of your feelings on this conference, they played the best teams in the conference before February. Like you look at the top of the ACC, Duke, Clemson, SMU, Wake Forest, North Carolina, Pittsburgh. The only team that you haven't played in the top, what is that? 8? Is that the top 8? Is Stanford. You'll play them at the very end of the year. You have played 8 of the top 10 up until this point. Well, actually 7 of the top 9, considering that you were also a top 10 team. So you look at this, you've played the toughest teams. Like, you have passed every test. January was a tough month. You passed the test. You didn't really just pass them either. You aced those tests. You passed the tests with flying colors. Fantastic month. You had one game of the 8 in which you won by single digits. All the other ones, you beat the supposed top teams in the conference by double digits. Some of those were even on the road. SMU, I'm drawing a blank. I'm sorry. SMU was really the only game that they won on the road by double digits against a top team. They did beat Virginia, but Virginia's a little further down. So you look at the next 10 games. Louisville is favored to win all of them currently. There's not a quad 1 game left on the schedule. Maybe the Pittsburgh game ends up being a quad 1 opportunity. But looking at the month of February, 5 road games, 2 home games, doesn't really worry me a ton because the Cardinals seem to play better on the road. I mean, it just seems like Louisville shoots better away from the KFC Yum Center. And for whatever reason that is, that's a conversation for a different day. But, I mean, I'm not really worried about this team playing on the road. They played really well on the road. They took Kentucky down to the wire in Rupp Arena when they were dealing with all their injury issues. So, looking at the rest of this schedule, okay? Let's look at February. Georgia Tech is 9-12. Boston College, under 500. Miami, under 500. NC State is currently under 500. Notre Dame, you guessed it, under 500 in conference play. They're 10-10 overall. Florida State is over 500. Virginia Tech is under 500. And then you have Pittsburgh and Stanford, who are over 500. And then the last game of January, or one of the last games of January, is California, who's also over 500. So March will be against more respectable teams. Notre Dame is at 500. Florida State is also over 500. But looking at the conference records, let's look at the conference records. In the month of February, at this current moment on January 31st, you will not play a single team in the month of January that currently has a 500 or better record in conference play. That's sad for the conference, but good for Louisville. So if you're looking at this from a realistic standpoint in terms of probability of winning games, like Louisville's projected to win all of the last 10 games of the schedule. So even though it seems unlikely that Louisville could win the next 10, you're also sitting here like, it's like, oh, whoa, hold on here. There's a chance. I personally am not going to think about the potential of winning out until you get to March. Like, if you get to March and you go 7-0 in the month of February, then we're having a real conversation. And if your preference is to have that conversation earlier, then go for it. I'm not telling you how to be a fan or how to analyze the schedule or how good this team is. All I'm suggesting is that I'm not really focusing on that until you get closer. Like if you pass all of the tests in February, like yeah, you have road games, but and I know that Louisville plays better on the road, but winning on the road in conference play isn't the easiest. And a lot of that is because you're playing teams that probably aren't going to make the tournament. So their highlight of the season is trying to ruin your season and give you a bad loss. So there's the extra motivation there is that they're playing with no pressure and they're playing with house money. So the pressure is on Louisville to handle business. Like you go from can you win these games against teams that are probably close to being as good as you to now you're 100% better than the teams you're playing, but can you prove that on the road? And I think Louisville can. It's just a matter of if they will or not. So keep an eye out there for to see how long this winning streak can go. I really like that Louisville has increased it to double digits, and I think that it's having a ton of an impact on the optics of the program in terms of the national narratives. You know, people are looking at this program in a different way. The program is becoming more relevant as well. And we're just seeing people talk more and more about Pat Kelsey, more about the Louisville Cardinals. And I think one of those reasons as well is because Louisville is making some noise in recruiting. Getting the number one point guard in the class is extremely significant. It leads us into the second fan question of the episode. Can Louisville become a powerhouse in high school recruiting? I think that the answer is a little bit more complex than just a yes or no. We'll explain when we come back on this Friday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Attending the Super Bowl has to be an experience like no other. With the energy and the excitement, the connection with other fans, it's unmatched. The thrill of seeing your favorite team clinch a playoff win live, it's a memory you'll probably never forget. Now, I'm a Los Angeles Chargers fan, so those memories don't come around all that often. But it's not just about football. If you look to the basketball side of things, Game Time makes it even easier to create those unforgettable moments with other Cardinals fans. I have used Game Time picks all season to get tickets to almost every home game at the KFC Yum Center. And when I download the app, you see the incredible value that you have at your fingertips with the no surprise fees at checkout, the panoramic views from your seats, and many more key features. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply again. Create an account and use the code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Cardinal fans, I'm pleased to tell you all that January was one of the top months for the Locked On Louisville podcast in terms of viewership since the podcast was created back in August of 2021. You all absolutely did some great work in terms of sharing the content, subscribing, watching on YouTube, listening on audio services. I can't even begin to tell you how grateful I am. And I hope you continue to make us your first listen of the day. The second fan question, I really like to answer these fan questions because at the end of the day, it's all about having a discussion about this team, right? Or about the university and the athletics department, right? Can Louisville become a powerhouse in high school recruiting? Now, this isn't as straightforward as the first question because we're about to enter even more uncharted territory. With revenue sharing set to commence at the end of this athletics calendar in the summer, I would be lying, and I think everyone would be lying if they could tell you that they could predict the future of recruiting with revenue sharing. Because if this was 10 years ago, I think that the answer would be yes. Now you don't have the Nike brand to recruit behind, but I do think even with Adidas, and I know that everything that happened, but Pat Kelsey and the way that he recruits, I think that you could be a powerhouse in recruiting. I mean, even though that Louisville really historically has never been on that level, um, I think that the question you have to ask is number one about conferences. Big Ten and SEC are going to have advantages, and how much is that going to factor in? Like revenue sharing, how much are those schools, SEC schools, going to pour into basketball when, football is the main focal point? Same with the Big Ten. And it's going to benefit those predominant basketball schools. Like UConn is going to spend a lot of their budget on basketball. Duke will spend the majority of their budget on basketball. North Carolina, I feel like, is up in the air. Kentucky probably will spend a good portion of their money on basketball, football as well. But you understand what I'm saying. Like those those athletic departments that are focusing mainly on basketball. And I think that Duke and UConn are going to benefit a ton from this because other programs are going to pour the majority in football. So I know that football is the money-making sport, but some schools just don't have football like that, and basketball matters most. Now, good thing is that I feel like Louisville has a chance continuing to win games, and more success. I feel like means bringing back some old donors that you currently haven't had, and you lost in COVID times, and you lost when you weren't able to win games over the past couple of years. You bring some of those big donors back, and on top of the revenue sharing, you can create that competitive advantage. So you look at the logistics side of things, and that's sort of where the main question becomes, because from the sentimental aspect of it and from the basketball point of view, I think it makes sense. But it also, you have to define, like, what is the definition of powerhouse? Like, are you talking top 5 perennially? Is it adding multiple top 40 guys? Like, what do you constitute as a powerhouse? Now, for me, if you asked my opinion, I would say I would say probably top 5 every year, because I don't take the word powerhouse lightly, same as the word elite. Like, I don't just throw around the term elite just to throw it around. It kind of waters down the significance. But you look at the top 5 for the past 3 years, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite. 2023, it was UK, Duke, UConn, Michigan State, and Louisville, mainly because they had 6 recruits in that class. 2024, Duke, Alabama, Arkansas, Rutgers, Missouri. 2025, Duke, Houston, UConn, Arkansas, Kentucky. So I would imagine, that you're going to see SEC schools be involved in those rankings. I imagine Duke and Kentucky are going to always be there. I'm not sure that Louisville would ever get to Duke and Kentucky levels of recruiting, and that's okay. As long as you can develop your recruits, that's all that I care about. But can they get to a spot to where they are, right there in the top 5 consideration every year? I think that there is a good chance, because revenue sharing and the NIL portion of things, I do believe that you're going to have a competitive opportunity. You're not going to be on the same level as some schools, but you're going to be right there. I think that the success of this season early on is doing wonders for the program's image, the optics of the program, um, and then the early recruiting success. Kenai Roots committed last spring. That's a top 40 recruit. You also have Michael Brown Jr. committing, the number 1 point guard, and it's sort of an indicator for other top players. Like, okay, these guys are showing that it's okay to come here because you're going to have your skill set maximized. And I think that you're starting to see that trend pop up, that narrative pop up, where people are talking about, what was it? John Fanta on a recent podcast said, I would play for Pat Kelsey. Number one, Pat Kelsey is a likable guy. It's hard to dislike Pat Kelsey. Number 2, the system that he has, it's very friendly for offensive players. Like, it's a fun system to play in. It's the same reason why people want to go play for Nate Oates at Alabama because you're going to play in a fast-paced offense that likes to score points, that likes to shoot threes, that likes to get out and move in transition. So, and it's a system that you're seeing now that it works. It sounded good theoretically in the summer, but until recruits could see it work, it's a whole different story. So now that you're seeing it work, Louisville is 16-5. They've won 10 straight games and they're rising up the net rankings. Like, yeah, I think everything's kind of coming together. So my question is, outside of the logistical side of things, which we still have to figure out, what does prevent Louisville? Like, you have the historical prominence, you have the arena, you've got the facilities, you've got the fan base, you've got the NIL opportunities, you've got the coach, you've got the system. Like, why couldn't Louisville be a powerhouse powerhouse in high school recruiting? My apologies there. It's kind of hard to speak for 30 minutes at a time, contrary to the beliefs of some. But you understand, right? It's a lot of things are working in Louisville's favor. So I would say, yes, the Cardinals can become powerhouses or become a powerhouse in high school recruiting, but some things we'll just have to wait and see on. And that's what I'm saying with revenue sharing. So when we come back, Louisville is back in action tomorrow. We got one more segment on the show previewing the upcoming matchup against the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. Yellow Jackets are going to be dealing once again with a key amount of injuries and more. So we will preview why Louisville will win this game when we come back on this Friday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Once again, want to take the time to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder that the Locked On Louisville podcast is free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. The Louisville Cardinals look to extend the 10-game winning streak to 11 when they take on Georgia Tech on Saturday down in the McCamish Pavilion in Atlanta, Georgia, 3:45 Eastern Standard Time tip-off on the CW network. I haven't seen a spread currently. I don't think that they've come out yet, as of mid-afternoon on Friday, but the matchup predictor on ESPN's analytics has Louisville as a 70% chance to win this game. Louisville and Georgia Tech completely going different directions. The Yellow Jackets have lost 5 of their last 6 games. And it's been a real tough go for Damon Stoudemire's team in year 2 at the helm of the Rambling Wreck. They're 9-12 overall, 13th in the ACC with a 3-7 conference record. They lost this past game against Notre Dame. They snapped a 4-game losing streak by beating Virginia Tech last weekend, but they lost to Syracuse on the road by 7, SMU on the road by 22, Clemson at home by 11, and Florida State on the road by 13. So looking at the net rankings here, Georgia Tech 143rd in the net as of Thursday, and the Yellow Jackets are 0-10 in Quad 1 and Quad 2 win opportunities. 3 of those 10 games were at home. 2 of the 3 were double-digit losses. So they're 9-2 in Quads 3 and 4. Overall, this has been a tough year for Stoudemire's team. I thought that they could make some noise, but like Louisville, when you deal with so many injuries, it makes things challenging. The main thing to focus on here is that Georgia Tech is extremely undermanned. They don't have a lot of players playing. They played 7 guys last week, or 7 guys last game. I would imagine Lance Terry is going to play this game. I talked to someone who covers Georgia Tech, and some key players are likely not going to be available. They missed some time, and there is a good chance that the Yellow Jackets will be without. There's a good chance that Georgia Tech will be without Kawasi Reeves Jr., Jaden Mustaff, and Luke O'Brien. Reeves and O'Brien were projected starters coming into the year. All three, or two of them, averaging 9 points a game, and Luke O'Brien averaging 6.4. So Lance Terry, the leading scorer for the Yellow Jackets, and if the 6'3" senior from College Park, Georgia, is able to go, then Georgia Tech will have a little bit of a benefit than obviously if he wouldn't, considering he's averaging 15.4 points per game, leading the Yellow Jackets in scoring. This is a pretty guard-heavy team. Javion McCollum, Nathan George, rounding out the three-headed monster at guard. You have, I think it's Baye Ndongo, if I'm saying that correctly, 6'9", 240 pounds from Senegal, from a sophomore, averaging, let's call it 12 and 8 points and rebounds per game. And then you have Duncan Powell, 6'8" junior, averaging 10 and 6. So a lot of what Georgia Tech likes to do is run the ball through guard play, and they shoot the ball fairly decently at 34% from three. They don't really force a ton of turnovers, but they turn the ball over at a decent amount as well. You look at the free throw line, they do not shoot the ball well from the charity stripe whatsoever. And overall, they score pretty similarly to what Louisville does. It's just more so on the defensive side of things. Gave up 91 to Florida State, 93 to SMU, giving up over 70 multiple times. Teams score points on Georgia Tech. It's just a matter of, I think Louisville's roster meshes better with the players that they have in the shorter rotation than potentially Georgia Tech. So I think for the Cardinals, I look for this game to be a really opportune game for Rain Smith. I think if Rain Smith can get going from 3-point land, which he has been able to do on the road, the Louisville Cardinals. Sorry, once again, slipped up on my words. Once or twice in a 30-minute monologue, which apparently is extremely easy to do. But I digress. I feel like at the end of the day, if Louisville handles business, takes Georgia Tech seriously, this is a game that the Cardinals are probably going to be favored by really close to double digits. I mean, they were favored over Wake Forest by almost double digits, and Georgia Tech, a team barely in the top 150 in the net, trending in the wrong direction. I think if you limit Georgia Tech from the 3-point line, if you get out and just score a good amount of points, and this seems very cliche, score a lot of points and defend the 3-point line. But that's sort of been the recipe for success. I do want to see, again, can Louisville continue the trend of shutting down the opposing team's best player? Lance Taylor, if he's able to go, will the Cardinals be able to make life difficult for him like they did for Hunter Salas and JJ Starling and RJ Davis and Boopy Miller and Isaac McNeely? That's something that we will just have to keep our eye on. So when we come back in February, God, it feels like January's got like 45 days. January's just lasted a long time, but it's been a good month for Louisville basketball. When we come back, hopefully we will have seen the winning streak extended into February. We'll see you then. Everyone have a great day. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here in a couple days.